All right, hi. So in this video, we're going to go over how to make a web page. That's probably what you are here for, right? So we're going to go over a lot of things. We're going to go over HTML, which is hypertext markup language. That is the language we'll be using to do a lot of the stuff we do. We'll look at text editors you can use to make web pages, saving a file, auto-saving, opening in a browser. There's too much to talk about here. It's going to be a little bit. We're going to use VS Code for this, so I'll show you that in a second. We're going to talk about browsers a little bit and how to inspect pages. And then all this stuff is about tags and stuff you don't know about yet, probably. So, but lots about HTML, a little bit of CSS and things like that. So let's go ahead and do this. Firstly, I wanted to talk about what we're going to use to make this, or in this video anyway. We're going to use an app called Visual Studio Code, or VS Code for short. If you look it up, you'll find it. It runs on Mac or PC or Linux, almost anything, I think. It's basically just, it's a text editor, right? So what you do when you're making web pages is you're basically making a text file using content, obviously, and some code, right? So VS Code is one app that you can use to do that. But you really just need a text editor. I opened up TextEdit on a Mac, which is kind of similar to Notepad on a PC, which is just the built-in text editor. This is what we used to do to make web pages. We used to use this app, and it's just a text, right? I can type stuff in there. It's just plain text as well. It's not like Word or a word processor. So if you can see this here, it says plain text. You could use this to do the class if you wanted to. It'd take a little longer, and it doesn't have some of the bells and whistles, but it would work. Any text editor will work, is my point. Any plain text editor. So plain text, again, means not rich text, which is formatted for like bold and italics and things like that. Not a Word document, which has sort of invisible formatting. So you don't want to use like a word processor to do this kind of stuff, because there is some formatting built into the app that you don't necessarily see, but it would mess up a web page, for example. So I'm going to quit that because we're not going to use this. So this is TextEdit, which I guess you could use it if you really want to, but got to get rid of this stuff. Hold on. Can't even get rid of it. See, there we go. All right, so we're going to use Visual Studio Code. There are other editors, and you'll see videos in the class using other editors. I've kind of skipped around. They're kind of trendy. Like one editor will be popular for a while and then another. But again, they're just text editors. So they're just different ways to kind of do the same thing. So we're using Visual Studio Code. There's also one called Atom, which has a cool animation, at least it does right now, that people like. There's one called Sublime Text. There's this one called Barebone, or BB Edit, which actually is the one that I use all the time for just plain text stuff like this. I just showed you that. That's BB Edit. It's Mac only, I think. Most of these are not. A couple other things. I wanted to show you the W3C, if we haven't talked about that yet, which maybe we haven't. That's the World Wide Web Consortium. That's the official standards body for web. Well, not more than just web. For a lot of things: HTML, JavaScript, CSS, all the languages, lots of languages and stuff. It's a international organization. It's kind of like whatever is official for coding the web. They're the ones that kind of say what that is. So if you hear W3C or the W3, that's what that is. A couple of references too that might be helpful. One is called W3 Schools. If you look up how to do a certain thing in HTML or CSS, a lot of times this will come up first, and it's a pretty good quick reference. Here's kind of something similar to what we're going to do today, actually. So it's a good reference to think about. Another good reference is MDN Web Docs, which is Mozilla, which is a Mozilla site. Mozilla is the company that is behind Firefox, which is a browser, right? You probably knew that. But they've got really good references for things, code references and stuff. So one good thing about this kind of stuff is web developers. There's a lot of resources on the web about the web. Figure that. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then this last tab that I have is the validation service that the W3C does that will help you check your page. And we'll use it today at the end. And you should do it all the time on anything you're doing in the class or outside of class too. And it kind of checks that you did write things officially correctly. It's not always maybe 100% correct, but it will help a lot. And it helps you find mistakes too. so that if you have a mistake and you don't know it, it'll help you find that. All right, so that is that. Let's get this out of the way here. So now you got the dreaded blank screen, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder, and I'm going to put my name on it, just like you would, but you use your name, of course. And I'll say Mark Garrett, Site 1. What I really want to make sure that you guys do is put your name on their folder when you start, because what I'll have you guys do is zip these folders. And let me just zip it now just to show you what that works. I'm going to right click and go to compress, and then nothing happens. Oh, there it is. There's the zip file. So that's actually what you would turn in usually to Canvas or whatever we're using to turn things in. That takes the folder and kind of makes it into one file, even if there's a bunch of files inside of it. And that's what you can attach as your submission to Canvas. And I wanted to make sure that you knew you want to title or put your name on your site folder, your folder for your work, before you zip it, because if you do it after, it doesn't take. So it'll just use when I unzip it, it'll have whatever name is on here. So if you didn't have anything on there, or if you just had Site 1, when I unzip it, it'll be like Site 1. I'm like, who's that? I don't know who Site 1 is. That's a weird name. It has to have your name on it before you zip it, or else it won't be on it after. All right, so hopefully that made a little bit of sense. So I've got this empty folder. There's nothing in it, right? If I open it, there's nothing in it. Now I'm going to open VS Code, which looks like this when you open it. Or it may look different. It'll probably look different by the time you see it. VS Code it changes a lot, so it could very easily look differently than when you open it, depending on when you see this video. So yeah. So one thing I wanted to show you is one thing we're going to use today is called an extension. So down here on the left, there is a button, control, that is for extensions. So what that does is lets you search for extensions. So extensions are add-ons to VS Code, sort of plugins that you can add on to do things. So the only one we're going to use today is called Live Server, and I already have it. But if I search for it, if I go live up here and I go Live Server, it'll come up. And it's a very popular server. See, at this point, it's been downloaded like 15 million times. All you do is click install. Mine's already installed, so it doesn't say that, but you click install. You may have to restart VS Code, but maybe not. It depends on the extension, actually. And then that's it. So now you've got this extension called Live Server, and you'll see what that does in a minute, but that's all we're gonna install. There are thousands of extensions, and I'll probably have another video for you guys with some possible extensions. Extensions are tough a little bit because sometimes the VS Code itself will get the same ability as the extension gives, so the extension's kind of not needed anymore, and it's hard to tell when that is. It gets pretty complicated. Part of the maybe a little issue with these extensions is anybody can write these extensions, so there's like thousands of them, and you never know, like you might not know which one is good and which one's not. But anyway, you'll probably see that in a different video about VS Code. I'm going to try to stay away from talking too much about VS Code here because that's not really the important part. So that's it. We just installed, or you installed Live Server. I already had it, so that's it. So now I'm going to close. You can close all these windows with these little X's, right, to do that. I'm going to drag a folder. You can see it says open folder, but you can also just drag a folder in here, and then it will open the folder, and you'll still get maybe this welcome screen, but there's no files in here, right? So we don't have anything. So I'm going to click on new file here. I could do that right there, or I could go up here and go to new file, or I could do Command or Control N. All those work, and I'm going to click on that. And it says select a language. So I'm just going to click there, and this is sort of a little quick thing you can do. You just put HTML. As soon as I start typing HTML, it goes, oh, you want to make an HTML page, and I'll click on that, or just hit return actually, but I'll just click on it. And then now you have an HTML page, but you don't really yet. This is just, right now, this is just a plain text file. So there you'll see this little tab up here. Here's a tab for welcome, and here's a tab for the page we're on. It's called Untitled 1. Not a very good title. But it's blank, it's empty, right? So this first one we're gonna do, start from scratch, because you're starting from scratch, right? And just do the whole thing from scratch. And then later you'll see, sometimes I'll give you files to start with. Sometimes I'll give you text to start with, but this one, we're starting from scratch. So the first thing we're gonna type is the left angle bracket, or less than sign, I guess you could call it, next to your M on your keyboard. And then I'm going to type an exclamation mark. And then you can see it says doc type. So we'll go ahead and accept that. We'll save a little bit of time here. So one good thing about VS Code or a lot of these editors versus just a plain text editor like TextEdit is it knows a lot of languages, right? So it's gonna try to figure out what you wanna type before you type it. So all you have to do is hit enter or return if it's highlighted, or if there's a bunch of options there, you can arrow key to it. Your arrows are those little up and down arrows. If you have those keys, sometimes you don't, depending on your keyboard. But you can arrow to it and then hit return. So I'm just gonna do hit return or enter on my number pad actually. Does the same thing. And what you do is you get the doc type tag. So I said a bunch of weird things. Doc type, what's that? That's short for document type. Let me make this big so you make sure you guys can see. That's too big probably. I think you guys can see that. So it's doc type is short for document type. It tells the browser basically, because we're gonna look at this in a browser, right? Tells the browser what version of HTML to use. Used to be the doc type was a lot longer, and it would say like version 4, version 4.0, 2, whatever, all this different stuff. Now we're kind of on HTML5. I mean, that's kind of was a marketing thing, a name for it, but really there are no versions anymore because different parts of HTML are being developed at different speeds. So they don't say like, here's version 2, here's version 3. It just kind of comes out of different parts. So now there's no 5 on there. But you may see an older doc type that does have numbers on it, like HTML4 or something like that. And what this does is tell the browser that you're using a modern HTML as opposed to some older version where it may actually look a little bit different in the browser. So tags, I mentioned the word tags. Tags is the formatting text, formatting characters, I guess you might say, or text in the document. So the tags are used to format and structure your web page. So that's an important thing to remember. It's the structure, kind of the outline of your page. It's kind of it's an outline kind of. So this is just the first thing that goes on the page every time. And later I'll probably, you can save this as a template page and not have to type this every time. Obviously, there are also some shortcuts. You don't have to type this every time, but for this time we are. Then I'm gonna go to the next line and type HTML. As soon as I type HTML, or HT actually, HT, yeah. HTML, then it highlights HTML, so I can just hit enter again. And then it completes that tag, so it's auto-completing, right? It's like code hinting and auto-completing, those are the terms. And then I'll put the other bracket, which I forgot to mention. That's the greater than sign, I guess, and that's the ending of the tag, or the end of the opening tag. So then it puts in this thing automatically. What is that? That's called the closing tag. So most tags, not all, this one doesn't have it, but most tags have an opening tag and a closing tag. So you can kind of think of them as containers, or things that you put things into, right? So the HTML container contains your entire HTML stuff, your entire web page. So I just put I put the cursor at the end of that line and hit a couple of line breaks just to get those apart. You see how before I did that, let's see, VS Code puts the cursor in between those because it thinks you want to type in there, which is where you would be typing. But I'm gonna put in some line breaks so it's a little easier to work with and easier for you guys to see. One thing about HTML is it doesn't really care how you type it as far as line breaks, spaces, tabs, that kind of stuff. The browser doesn't care. So you can kind of type it the way you want to have it, kind of readable. So yeah, I'm just gonna put in some line breaks and tabs and stuff sometimes. Sometimes it'll put tabs in for you, actually, try to help format it for you. But all right, one thing I forgot is I want to add what's called an attribute. So I'm gonna go inside the tag. So when I say inside the tag, all I did was click right there after the L in the HTML. And I think I mentioned this, but HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. That's the language we use for the structure of the web page. HTML, people say, right? So I'm going to put a space, and then I'm going to say language. And as soon as I type LA, it highlights lang for me, which is short for language. I can hit return now, and it'll put it in automatically. And then it also put in an equal sign and quotes, because this is called, let me zoom in here, this is called an attribute. So some tags can have attributes. And if you see it has this hinting stuff on too as well, if I roll over stuff, it will tell you what it does. That's another thing that VS Code does. You can turn that off, it can get annoying. But if I roll over this, it says, helps define the language of an element. Oh, well, there you go. So we're gonna say language, which is the same thing as language, equals, and then in quotes, we're gonna put EN, which is English, because we're doing this in English. So there are other options for that, but we're doing it in English, so we put language equals EN in there. So this is called, again, an attribute. An attribute is always, always a property and a value. So property that we're setting is language, and the value is English. If that makes any sense. And there's an equal sign in between. The values always are supposed to be in, whoops, I just moved that. The values are always supposed to be in quotes. It might work without it, but you just generally want to put your values inside of quotes there. So that is an attribute. Not all tags have attributes or need attributes. A lot of them will. They only go in the opening tag. So if I forgot to mention the closing tag part. This is the opening tag, HTML, and then it has an attribute language equals EN. The closing tag looks the same as the opening tag, except I forgot to mention this, it has a slash in front of it. So the slash or / next to your shift key on the right side of your keyboard, that tells the browser that this is a closing tag. So opening tags do not have a slash. Closing tags do have a slash. So that means that everything in between here is inside of or nested inside of that tag. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense. Yes. Oh, by the way, now that I have that, well, we'll save this in a second. I'm gonna get rid of this sidebar in a second so we have more space. But okay, so next thing we're gonna do is put in the head element. So I'm gonna do HE, and as soon as I do that, it says head. So then I can hit just enter again, and then I can put the right angle or the greater than bracket, right? The greater than sign, and then it completes that for me. And then I'll put in a couple of line breaks again, or I'll just put one for now. And then I'm gonna do this and then I'll explain it here in a second. Then I'm gonna put meta, and this is where it gets kind of weird. Char set or char set. I don't know how people actually say it. It's character set. That's what it actually stands for. And then we're gonna put in the quotes, we're gonna put UTF-8. And then close the bracket. So this one does not have a closing tag. So let me back up just a second. So this is the head of the document. The head of the document is where you put information about the document. Other stuff goes there too. Sometimes you'll put CSS styles there, which we'll get to in a week or two, a couple weeks probably, or a while. Depends when you're watching this, maybe in your summer. But yeah, you could put other things in here besides just meta tags and things. But this is information usually about the document. It's not the actual content. The content's going to be down here, which we'll get to in a second. So we're putting in what's called a meta tag. And a meta tag, oh look, it tells me what it is. It represents, it has information about the document, usually. So this one is the character set meta tag, which says we're using UTF or Unicode version 8. That is the machine characters or computer characters that we're using for this document. That's probably enough to know about that. You want to put that in because it tells the browser what kind of characters to use for this. And there's thousands of them in there, thousands of characters in that character set. That's the standard kind of character set that we will use all the time actually for this class. Used to be you didn't have to put this on, but then there was some versions of Unicode that had some security flaws or something. So you just basically put it in there and you're good. Yeah, that's probably enough to say about that. And then we'll go to the next line, and this one gets even more nasty, but this is the only kind of nasty tag we're going to do today. Nasty as far as like, what is all that? We're going to say meta name. Name equals, and then quotes, we're going to put viewport. This one's a little complicated, so. And let me make this wider so you guys can see it all on one line. And then I'm going to put a space, and then we're going to put another attribute. So this is an attribute name. This one's also an attribute content. And then inside of this one, we're going to put a bunch of stuff. So I'm just going to type it. Width equals device dash width, comma, initial dash scale equals 1.0. And I think that's it. Let me make sure I got that right. Viewer content equals width equals device width, comma, initial scale 1.0. That is it. Yes. What is all that nastiness? What is that? What is that? What that's doing is that's kind of a newer, these are called meta tags, by the way. See the word meta there. They're information about the document. What this one does is called the viewport meta tag. What it does is it kind of helps the mobile phones know how to scale your web page. So I don't know how old you guys are because, you know, that's privacy stuff. I don't care how old you are. But if you're over a certain age, back in the day, like, oh man, like 13 years ago, 14 years ago, back when the mobile first came around, 2007, whatever that year was. When you saw a web page, you would just you'd have to pinch and zoom to see the web page because it was tiny, right? It took this big web page, and I've got my hands apart, you can't see it. But I took this big web page and it squished it down to mobile phone size, but it scaled the whole thing. Like the text would be too tiny to read, so you'd have to pinch and scale and double tap and do all this stuff to scale the web page up so you could see it, right? That doesn't really work very well. So now when you use this meta tag, what it does is it kind of pretends that the device is bigger or smaller, basically scales the website up for you. So the text is normal sized, for example. You don't have to pinch and zoom. So that's what that meta tag is for. It's like a mobile view meta tag. You can stick it in there. There are variations on this. You might see one later that's slightly different. But this is the general basic format. And so you just stick that in every web page. I would stick that on every web page. Even if the videos later you see, maybe I didn't have it in a web page, you should stick it in there because it will make the page work better on mobile, which is important now because everybody's on mobile all the time, right? All right. That's enough said about that. You might see other stuff about that one too later, about viewports and stuff. The viewport actually is a fancy name for the browser or the device, if you want to think of it that way. Okay, next one. I know this is kind of blowing all your minds and everything, but we're going to keep going. We're going to say title, and this one I'm going to say Mark Garrett's. You put your name in there, not mine. First web page. It's not really my first web page. Hopefully not for your sake. But yeah, Mark Garrett's first web page. So that is probably easy to figure out. That is the title of your document. So where does the title show up? I will show you in a minute. I'm going to save it as a surprise. But titles are very important because they're used in bookmarks and search engines could use them. So you want to use a good title. This is probably not a great title. It's not the worst in the world. But you definitely don't want to leave it untitled because then somebody bookmarks it and it says untitled in their bookmarks. They're like, I don't know what that is, and they never use it, right? So you want to make it descriptive if you can. It's good for what's called SEO, search engine optimization. Yeah, remember that term, SEO. Okay, so that is the end of the head, actually. Yeah, that's all we're going to stick in there. We haven't even saved our file yet, which is probably not a great idea in case my computer crashes. But what I'm going to do is put on the last two things that you would need to make sort of a template file if you wanted to. So I'm going to go down inside after the closing head tag, but before the closing HTML tag. So in here, I'm going to put body. And there's the body tag. So, which sounds kind of bad, body tag, but it's HTML tag. So here's a way to remember this. So the head is above the body, right? So you've got the head of the document, which is kind of where your title goes and some other sort of behind the scenes code, but nothing you're actually going to see. I guess you see the title. I'll show you that. But then the body is where the big stuff happens. That's where all your content's going to go, inside the body. So your head is on top of the body. That's how you can remember that. That's good, right? So we're going to start working in the body here in a second. Let's go ahead and save this guy since we haven't saved it. You see it says doc type HTML untitled. It doesn't really say anything, right? I'm going to go file save. And we're going to do this a couple different ways, but I'm going to go file save or command S, and then it's going to ask me to save it. And I'm going to save it inside there. And I'm going to name this Mark Garrett assignment 1. Whatever I call it, tell you to name these things, you kind of name it that way. But you always want, again, you always want your name on it. That's always going to be. So I have Mark _ Garrett _ assignment 1 .html. So it stuck HTML, or VS Code stuck HTML on there for me. I didn't have to do that. So that changes a plain text file. Just adding this extension, that tells the computer and the browser that this is a web page. .html. Pretty cool, huh? So it's just text. We're just typing text, right? We're not, it's not Photoshop or something where you have this image file or anything. This is just text. But since we said, if you add .html to it, then the browser and your computer know that it's a web page. And it's an HTML web page, right? A couple things about naming your files. No spaces. So I don't want to do that because that could cause problems, and you basically don't want any spaces. So if you want to put a space, you can use _, which is what I just used. That's the thing that's above your dash, or you could put a dash in there too. Dashes work, underscores work. I don't know why I use underscores. A lot of people do, I guess. But nothing else. You don't want to put like any punctuation in there or anything like that, because some of that stuff is part of the, if it's part of a file name, it'll cause weird things to happen. Like if you put a slash, you don't want to do that. That is part of a URL or a file locator sort of system. And yeah, we'll talk about that later, but you don't want to do that. So underscores and dashes are okay. Probably nothing else as far as punctuation. You will see punctuation in URL sometimes, but usually that has a purpose. It's doing something. So I think that's good. Yeah. So name it, put your name on it, no spaces. You can use underscores and dashes. And I'm putting it in that same folder, obviously, that I made when we started with, already has my name on it. So I'm going to save. As soon as I do that, now it has my file name there. You can see that, right? And it has .html at the end. And now it shows up here in the sidebar in VS Code as open editor. And then it also shows up in my folders here. Well, that's my folder right there, right? So now we can see that that's going on. How do we look at this? We've made a bunch of code here, but we haven't seen anything. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and I'm going to show you a couple ways to do this. I'm going to open a new browser window, and this is how you're usually going to work, or how I work anyway. You're usually going to work this way too. Take my word for it. I'm going to put up a browser, empty browser next to my code editor. So the funky thing to get your head around in working in HTML or a lot of this stuff is you're going to look at the same file two ways. You're going to look at it here in the code. This is the code, obviously, right? And then you're going to look at it in the browser. We're actually making we're making a web page. We're not making some code that people are going to see. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and grab, I could go here and go file open or whatever I want to get that open. An easy way that I like to do it is you can, once you have your web page, there's my web page, right? It's in my folder. I can just drag it I can drag it up here. I can drag it down here, and it opens. That's open. That's the web page. Super exciting web page. It's kind of minimalism, I think. We don't see much yet, right? Do we see anything? Yes. What do we see? Here's a trick question here. We see our title. Oh, there's the title in the tab. So that is another reason that tab or title is important. They show up in the tab, right? If you have no title, it's going to say nothing or untitled or something. So there you go. That's the only thing we actually see right now, though. Kind of boring, right? So I could, let's go ahead and add something to this and then see how we can view this work this way. And then we'll work in a little bit different way that might be faster. Well, for sure it'll be faster. Okay, so I'm gonna go down here inside the body and I'm gonna put my first piece of actual content, sort of. I'm gonna do H1. And remember, every time you type a tag, you're typing the less than, and then the tag name, right? Less than, tag name, greater than, and then VS Code will autocomplete probably the tag for you, and then put the cursor in between because it thinks you want to type there, which you kind of do. So I'm going to put in, this is Mark Garrett's, kind of the first, same thing I put in the title. First web page. There, this is Mark Garrett's first web page. So I typed in that inside that H1 tag, which I haven't explained what that is yet. But I don't see anything there, right? I don't see anything on my screen yet, in my browser. So this is one way to work, which you can if you want. I probably won't, but I'm gonna go ahead and go File Save, Command S or Control S, or just File Save. And I saved it, because that wasn't saved, right? I just typed something, but I didn't save it. Then I go over here, and I click the reload button, or refresh, sometimes called refresh, depends on the browser. And there it is. Whoa, wow, we got stuff on there. It's exciting. So now we have actual content on there. It's magic. It's not really magic. But there you go. So now we have a web page, the slightly less boring, almost as boring as it was before. So we added what's called a heading level 1 tag. H1 stands for heading level 1. You see it says H1 element represents a section heading. So there are a bunch of different levels. We'll go through that in a second, but I wanted you to see how that starts to appear. We actually got something on the web page there. So that's good. Yeah, let's keep going. We're on a roll now. Next thing we're going to put is P, and that stands for, you can probably maybe guess, a paragraph, maybe? Maybe you didn't guess that. Let's type it. This is a paragraph. So now that I typed that, P stands for paragraph, I put the content in between. So remember we said way back 45 minutes ago or whatever, that HTML tags are often containers. So H1 is the container for this content. Paragraph is the container for this content. And I think I mentioned it's kind of like, HTML is kind of like an outline, right? Check out down here in the bottom left of, this is in VS Code. It's not in everything, but it's in VS Code. It has an outline. So, and it even says outline. And underneath the hood, browsers are kind of making an outline of your page as well. So you can click on these little guys and zoom to that part of the page. So here's an H1. If I click on it, see it's kind of highlighting or finding that in the outline. But you can see the outline here. You can use this thing to jump around if you want. I don't tend to use it too much, but you can. All right. So we still don't see our paragraph, right? So because we didn't save yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do two things. I'm going to go to File and turn on autosave. So there it, oops, I didn't zoom right. There is autosave. So now it's gonna automatically save. I can't really tell it did much. I think a little dot goes away up here, but it's automatically saved. Now if I refresh, that paragraph is there. I didn't actually have to do the save. So if I make a change, it will automatically save it, but I still have to refresh. The next thing we're gonna do is, and I'm not seeing my extension. Let me, yeah, something's acting a little weird. I should see the extension for live server extension should be running. Let me go back to my file. Let me restart here. I'm gonna quit. I saved it, so I'm gonna quit. And another good thing about VS Code is it'll reopen the same way Maybe I'll cut this out of the video, or maybe I'll let you guys watch me do this. Because this may happen to you too. There, open VS Code again, and it opens back where it was. At least it should. I got some other files open. There we go. So what I was doing that for, I'll leave that in because that's instructional. You're like, well, what's going on? If I look down here at the bottom, now it has the go live little button there, and I wasn't seeing that. So that's why I was like, something's wrong. So I just quit VS Code and reopened it, and it's there. So something was weird. Maybe because I was playing with the extensions panel. But now it has this go live extension. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on that, and it says starting, and then it opens another browser window, or tab actually. Here's my original tab. You can see that one says like users, Dragmar, desktop, blah, blah, blah. That's just the path to the file up here, right? If I click on this new tab that it has 127.0.1.0.0.1 500, blah, blah, blah. What is that? That is a little web server that's actually running now on the computer. And it says port 5500 down here, and that's why it says 5500 up there. What does that mean? That means you have now this is a real web server, which acts slightly different. So it's like I have a web server software, like I'm looking at something on the internet. The good part about this is it's live. That's why it's called live server. Get it? So what happens now is if I type something else here, and remember I have autosave is on. Yeah, I'm still on. If I go ahead and type something here, I'm just going to type some random gibberish. And then I wait. It has a little delay, but I waited like, 1 second. And look, that text showed up there. So now I don't have to do the save at all because I turned on autosave. Oops, I turned on autosave, right? And I opened this live server thing with that extension that I mentioned 2 hours ago. Now I can work a little faster. So all I have to do now is put in my code, wait a second, it'll auto save, and then this will auto refresh in like, I think it's a second. You can change that, but it's fine the way it is. All right, so that is good. See, I just deleted that and then it refreshed over here. So that's gonna save you, a couple seconds, 300 times. That's some real time there. All right, so that's the way we're gonna do things from now on, probably, is using live server. You may see things later that don't use it or use a different system or whatever, but that the rest of today anyway, I'm gonna use live server and then use this tab here. You'll see this one is still the old version. So this one won't refresh until I actually save this. Well, it's auto saving, and then I click the refresh. Then it'll refresh. This one should refresh right away. Don't know why that looks like it's a different size. I think I was zoomed. Yeah, they should be the same size. Okay, there we go. All right, now we're just gonna fly through some more tags and stuff. So I'm gonna add another paragraph, and I'll say this is a break. And then before the word break, I'm gonna put another tag, which is the break tag. This one's a little different. So this one the paragraph has an opening tag, right? There's the closing tag, it's got the slash, that's the closing tag. This one does not. A break tag is not really a container, it's just sort of a formatting, even though there's not a lot of formatting tags left, but it's a formatting tag and it adds a line break. So what happened up here? If you look at the actual, let me zoom this in actually. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you guys knew this, but you can zoom on you probably did, but you can zoom your browser with Command or Control plus and minus, and coincidentally, it's the same on brackets. Command plus, Command minus to zoom in or out. So you can make your text bigger in brackets. I should have told you that not brackets. I keep saying brackets because I used to use brackets in VS Code. So you can zoom in with Command plus or minus, zoom your code so you can see it better. It's kind of small sometimes. But, so I've got a break there. BR is break, right? Now you can say this, you can see this is a break and it puts a line break in. What's the difference between a paragraph and a line break? A break just goes to the next line. A paragraph usually has space above and below it, and it goes all the way across. It's actually an invisible container. I'll show you that when we inspect in a little bit. But Yeah, so it has some space above and below, and it's a rectangular container. A break just kind of sends to the next line. Also, a paragraph is a semantic tag or semantic markup. So is an H1. What does that mean? Semantic markup means you should use the tag. This is super important. I'll say it slow and dramatically. You should use the tag that represents your content or tells you something about the content. Meaning you want to use a heading level 1 when it's the most important heading on the page. I forgot to mention too that the W3C kind of wants you to use one H1 per page. It's kind of the subject of the page. Google says you can use more than one because they use it to index your page. Whoever you want to listen to, you'll see some people say one only and some people will say it's fine to use more than one. But anyway, I digress. But it's the most important level of heading on your page. A paragraph, if you remember from English class, like in 2nd grade, means sort of one thought, right? One part of your document, one idea, sort of, right? So that's what a paragraph is. So that's why we're using a paragraph tag around that, because it's one idea. This is not much of an idea, but you get the idea. So use the tag that makes sense for the content. It makes it much more accessible too. Accessibility is a big thing. Like, how do people access your page if they're using, say, a screen reader or some other system is reading your document? That's a possibility too, right? It's going to try to figure out what your document's about. So the tags help with that. So that's my little spiel on using semantic markup. So we'll try to use the tag that makes sense for the content. Is basically what it is. So yeah, this is a semantic tag. Paragraph is. Break is not. Break just says go to the next line. And you see there's no extra space there too. That was a long story about something kind of simple, but maybe not. Okay, so let's go to the next line again. Let's put in H2. This is a heading level 2 tag. You could probably figure that out. It's a little less important than in heading level 1. So remember, the browser's kind of making an outline of this document underneath. Oh, now that I've got this saved and you can see that the files are over here in the sidebar, I'm going to get rid of the sidebar because it'll give us more space. So that's Command B or Control B. And that hides and shows the sidebar so that you get, I don't need to see all this stuff right now. So there we go. We got a little more space there. All right. So in this H2, we're going to say, I'm just going to type some, these are some block level elements. Spelled it wrong. They create rectangular containers. Did I spell everything right? Ooh, almost. That's not spelled right either. Sorry, I'm typing poorly today. I'm a poor typist, which actually is good for you, probably, because I'll go slower. So these are some block level elements. They create rectangular containers. Now you can see that this heading level 2, is bigger than the body copy. So what I wanted you to see here a little bit is, in addition to what a block level element is, heading level 1 is a block element, paragraph's a block element, heading level 2 is a block element. Block element means they actually literally form like rectangular containers that go all the way across their containing element or their parent container. What does that mean? In this case, it's the browser. Even though it doesn't look like it, there's a box around here. And like I said, you'll see it in a little bit. Or I'll show it to you in a little bit. So that's the part of the block level. The other thing I wanted to show you is that there are some built-in styles styles, obviously, for some of these tags, right? So this heading level 1, we didn't really talk about it, but it looks different than this, right? This is body copy. If I zoom back to normal size, Command 0, that's a heading level 1, that's a heading level 2. The heading level 1 is bigger than the heading level 2. That's a built-in style, or really a CSS style. That's the other thing we're going to be doing is CSS, or cascading style sheets. So by default, a heading level 1 is bigger than a heading level 2. Makes sense, right? This is a little more important than that. Paragraphs are body copy. That's normal. Body copy means text that's not a heading, if you want to think of it that way, like the regular old text on a page. is called body copy. Other things about these block level elements, they have space around them. They have space above and below them. They create their own line breaks, things like that. Yeah, and you could change these styles if you wanted to. You do that with CSS. So if I wanted to make a heading level 2 bigger than a heading level 1, I could with CSS, which we'll get to eventually. I don't know why you would do that, but you could. So you can change the way that the HTML looks by default using CSS, which we will get to. All right, so let's go below this guy here and do a couple of block level tags. We already did an H1, but we'll do it again. Let's say this is a heading level 1 tag. And to save a little time, let's copy and paste. I'm going to copy that line and paste. And this time I'm going to change it to a heading level 6. And change this to a 6 too, right? So I've got H1, this is a heading level 1 tag. H6, this is a heading level 6 tag. So there are 6 levels of headings, 1 through 6. Heading level 1 is the most important. Heading level 6 is the least important. And of course, there's a 2, 3, and a 4, and a 5 in there too. If you look at how it looks, right, over here on the browser side, the heading level 1 is big, right? It's big as it gets. And then heading level 6 is really small. Heading level 6 is actually not great readability-wise. If you look at that, it's kind of fuzzy and it's bold too. Oh, I forgot to mention that. Headings are bold by default. Notice these are bold, right? But it's bold by default and it's pretty small, so it's kind of not very readable. So this would be a case where I might, if I was going to use a heading level 6, which you may never get to that level, it's like a pretty deep document, then you might want to make that bigger, right? That's not very readable. So you might use some CSS styles to fix that. Yeah, I would. So you probably should too. All right, so that's a couple of heading level heading tags. Again, there's 1 through 6. Let's do another paragraph, and then this time we're gonna do let's say this is a paragraph centered with CSS, and I spelled with wrong. And I should put a period in there to have good grammar, I guess. So this is a paragraph centered with CSS. It's not centered yet, but it will be. So now we're going to do a little bit of CSS. CSS, which I mentioned a minute ago, is cascading style sheets. So if the HTML is your structure and your outline of your document and your content, the CSS is the presentation of it, which means how it looks, mostly. And also some behavior stuff. The third part of that is JavaScript, which is more the interactive kind of calculation kind of stuff. That is often called the behavioral level. So HTML is called the structural level. CSS is called the presentation level or layer, and JavaScript is called the interactive part, or the interactive. So let's go ahead and add some CSS. How do we do that? I'm going to go into the opening paragraph tag. Remember, you just click inside of it and you say, this is one way to do it. We're going to say style equals, and then inside of there, let's do text align. And as soon as I started typing TE, it highlighted text align. So I could use the arrow key, but it's already on it since I don't have the arrow key, but I can just hit return and it'll put that in there for me. And then it typed a bunch of extra stuff. It typed a semicolon, or a colon, then a semicolon, and it put the cursor in there. And it gave me all the possible settings for this, this CSS property. It's called a CSS property. So I'm going to say center. I could just, again, arrow to it and highlight it and then hit return, or I can actually click on it. I'm going to click on center and check it out. What? Now it's centered. So that paragraph is centered with CSS. It is centered with CSS. So that is a bit of CSS. So what's going on here is style is an attribute. This is still HTML right here. Style equals, that's HTML. But now, since we use the style attribute, we're telling the browser everything in between here, in between the quotes, is actually CSS, a different language. 2 languages in one day. That is crazy. So CSS looks a little bit different than HTML. Let me zoom in a little differently here. And we're gonna obviously talk a lot more about this. I just wanted to give you a little taste of it. So text align is it's still a property value pair. Property like style, value is text align center. That's the HTML thing. CSS is also a property value pair. A CSS property is text dash align. That's the alignment of the text. You could probably figure that out. And a lot of the CSS properties are named pretty obviously. So text alignment is text dash align. And then you put a colon, and then you put the value, which is center. So in HTML, this is a little tricky, right? In HTML, it's property equals value. In CSS, it's property colon value. Other than that, it's kind of similar. And then the semicolon at the end, that's so you can add more properties if you want. Technically, that last semicolon, this guy right here, is not technically required, but everybody puts it there because it makes it easier to add more stuff if you want to add more stuff, which we are. What else was I going to say about that? I think that is that. Let's go ahead and add 2 more things. Let's add color. So now I'm going to add color, and then I'm just going to type red. And we're going to have a whole thing on color, so don't worry about that too much. But I just put color colon red, and brackets is that, or brackets, I keep saying brackets, sorry about that. VS Code is putting in this color thing for me because you can do color selection, color picker inside of VS Code, but I'm going to ignore that right now. So that's not really, that wouldn't show up in every editor, that little red square. But I use the word red, and I get, check that out, red text. Pretty obviously red, right? Let's do one more after the semicolon again. So remember, every time you're adding this is called a CSS declaration. That's a declaration. That's a declaration. They're separated by semicolons. The whole thing together is called the declaration block. And we're going to talk a lot more. I know I'm kind of doing a lot here, but we're going to go over this stuff again, so don't worry about it. So I'm going to say font size, and I started typing font, and then I got a bunch of font stuff, and I'll say font size. And here I'm going to actually type in, let's do 1.5 EM. And that's it. So now that text, I don't know if you saw that, it got slightly bigger. So 1.5 EM. EM is a unit. It's kind of like the font, the default font size, which happens to be about 16 pixels usually, sort of. So when we say 1.5, it's sort of like saying the same thing as 150%. So it's 1.5 times the size. So this text here, this paragraph text should be about twice as high or twice as big as this regular body copy. So I just wanted to throw those styles in there because I wanted to show you, give you a taste of CSS, because we're going to do a lot of CSS, but it's kind of the fun part too. It's kind of like formatting stuff and that kind of thing. Also wanted you to notice that, again, I can type this however I want. I didn't do this. Let me show you this real quick. Let's go after this word here, and I'll put in a bunch of extra spaces and even a tab. I didn't show you this. I should have showed you. Remember how I said that the browser doesn't care how you type things as far as spaces and tabs and things like that. I just put in a bunch of stuff there. What does it look like on my page? It doesn't look any different. So the browser generally, I'm not going to say completely, but generally doesn't care about extra spaces, tabs, how you type it. I could put in a bunch of line breaks here. Nothing changes over here. It doesn't care. So kind of the way I like to think about it, or one way to think about it, is when you're doing HTML and CSS, I guess, you are kind of the word processor. You are formatting the text. The browser is not. So whatever you tell it to do with the tags, it's going to do. It doesn't matter what you type here, usually. There are a few exceptions, but that's generally it. Okay, so that is a little taste of CSS. Let's do one last tag and then we're done. I know you're like, how long is this thing? Yeah, and feel free on these videos when they're longer like this one to stop in the middle and have a cup of coffee and a burrito or whatever, and you can pick them up, you know, in the middle if you want. I'm not breaking these up into little tiny pieces, so feel free to stop in the middle and take a break and come back to it later. But anyway, block quote. So I just put in block quote. What is block quote? It is, well, I'm just going to paste this in. Oh, I didn't warn you about copy and paste. That's the last thing I'll do. I'm going to paste this in because I don't want to have you guys watch me type all this. So the block quote tag specifies a section that is quoted from another source. It is used for long quotations. So I'm going to put a space there and paste it, and a space and paste it. I'm just going to put it in 3 times. Doesn't really matter. I wanted you to see that couple things. That other tags have extra formatting styles built into them as well. This is called the block quote, which is for long quoted text, right? So what it does is it has what's called a margin over here on the left, and it has a margin on the right, if you can see that. Let's make this a little narrower and you'll see it. Yeah. So I wanted you to see that. It also has a space above and below. It's actually got margins on all sides. So I wanted you to see that because, again, that's another example of how you can see that certain tags have certain properties. And a block quote is a block tag. One thing I also wanted to show you is you can inspect your page. So I did want to show you that. And to inspect, you just right-click. So I'm going to right-click and go to inspect. And it also, this features in Firefox and Chrome, and I think it's probably in Edge and Safari and everything else too. So I'm going to say inspect. And you'll get this big window, or it may come up on the side, depends whatever settings you had if you've ever used it. And what this lets you do is, just like it sounds, you can inspect things. So if I click on the H6 tag, see it highlights it? I can't show you both with the cursor. I'm on this H6 tag and it highlights it. Actually, I can click on this guy here, right there. And it'll highlight, there, oh no, I can't. Over here, you'll see that there's a heading on there, margin, and it shows you in orange. And it tells you how big it is, it tells you what the tag is, and it's showing you the margin. Let me go down to the block quote. There's the block quote. If you look over on the right, which I can't do right now with the cursor, but if you look on the right where it says block quote, it shows you all that orange. That is margin. Look up here. Oh, now I can do it over here. There's margin. There's 16 pixels of margin on the top and there's 40 on the sides. So this is called the CSS box model, which we're not going to get into right now because this video is getting too long. But it shows you the margin. So there's built-in margin around certain things. H1s have built-in margin. This one has 21.44 pixels. It's calculating it different ways. That's why it's weird numbers. Also tells you how big the content is. All kinds of cool stuff. Also shows you the styles. So if I go back to the block quote, here it says, I don't know if you guys can see that, user agent style sheet. What is that? Like a 007 thing. That is the built-in styles inside the browser, and it shows you a bunch of CSS styles that are built into the browser. There's the margins and display and all this stuff that you don't understand yet, and it's written in a way that we haven't used yet, so don't worry about that. But what I really wanted to show you is that you can see the styles in a page by inspecting it. And that works on any web page. I could go to Mission College's website, if it shows up, and then I'll right click on it and I'll go to inspect, and it'll open a new inspector window. I think it's a new one, yeah. And then now I can select stuff and see a bunch of CSS and HTML. Here's all the HTML, here's the CSS. Here's a bunch of stuff about it. Go away. Here's a bunch of stuff about it, and you can see how things are done. So a lot of people learn how to do HTML and CSS by doing this kind of thing. Inspecting pages, looking at the code. So you can look at the code and see what's going on. Last one thing that reminds me of is you can view the source for any page too. On Chrome, on a Mac, it's Command Option U. That's the shortcut to view the source. And you can see this is the actual HTML from that page. So you can look at the code from any web page that way by viewing the source. And it may have a different shortcut in different browsers, but well, it definitely does. But you can see the source. So this is actually what gets sent when the web page is sent, and then the browser converts it into that. Just like this is what gets sent when we write our code, and the browser converts it into that. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense as far as that goes. Let me show you one last thing in the inspector while we're here. There's also a mobile viewing mode. It's called different things in different browsers, but this one is up here. It says toggle device toolbar. If I click on that, then it shows you what your page looks like in a different device. So up here at the top, you can see that's set for iPhone 10. You could do an iPhone SE. That's what that page looks like. It even has a little like touch scrolling. You can scroll like you're actually on a phone. So this is super valuable to see what your page looks like in different devices. Here's an iPad. That's what it looks like on an iPad. iPad Pro. Yeah, lots of that stuff. Even Galaxy Fold. Wow. Galaxy S5, looks like that. So one thing you want to do when you're doing your web pages later, when you're doing them on your own, is look at the page in mobile and then also resize your browser. Don't get stuck by just maximizing your browser, because it may look fine and then you try to resize it, or somebody has a different sized monitor and then it doesn't work. Breaks things. So I wanted to say that as well. All right, so I think that is about it. You're like, wow, thank gosh. That is all of it, I think. One thing I wanted to say is, and I didn't do it, but you could have saved. So this is already saved because we had autosave on, but I'm gonna go do a save as. Maybe I want to save this as another version, and I'll do, I'll call this one template. And you don't have to do this, but sometimes it helps. I'm gonna save it as template. And then what I'm gonna do is take out everything in the body. So we're back to this, right? This is the basic text or basic code that you're gonna have on every web page or start with. So you could, if you wanted to, save this as a different file, and I called it template. I didn't just want to delete it, because if I would have done that, it would have erased all my stuff. So don't do that. It would have erased everything because it's autosave too. Although you can always undo, like I can do Command Z or Control Z and it undoes. So there is undo in VS Code, just Command Z or Control Z. But now that I have nothing in here except for the basic boilerplate HTML, somebody might call it, and I could save that as template, I could always open that file or just start with that file and go from there, and I won't have to type that ever again. I will show you a shortcut, another way to do this as well, but I wanted to show you guys that as well. That is it. Sorry, that was a lot of stuff. Hopefully your brains still work. Mine does a little most of the time. But that is it for now. Hopefully that was good, and I will talk to you again later.